What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Just an Editor podcast. My name is Corey Cudney, and I am just an editor. But today we have the director and producer of, honestly, some of the coolest films that we've had on here as far as doing like actual real reporting and good in the world. She directed documentaries such as Code, Debugging the Gender Gap, Bias, and most recently, the award-winning documentary Savvy, which takes on the gender dynamics behind money and what has led women to taking a backseat in their own finances. Today's guest is Robin Hauser.
Hi, Corey.
Hi, Robin. Thank you so much for coming on. I was just telling you in the pre-show, if you will, but I'm very excited to have you on today. It's going to be a lot of interesting discussions, I feel like.
Well, thank you. The honor is mine. Always love talking about film.
It really is a very cool thing because I feel like everybody you bring on has a new perspective and can talk about film in a totally unique way from anybody else. So I just want to get started right off the bat talking about Savvy. Like I said earlier, it takes on some actual issues and does really good reporting is a weird way for me to put it, but tackling these kinds of issues. I just want to jump off and say, how did you get started on Savvy specifically, and what kind of brought this on to be your next project?
Yeah, I'm always looking for pressing societal issues to make films about. But then again, I have to have some sort of personal experience with it because that's sort of, having a little skin in the game, I think makes makes it a little easier to go through the vicissitudes of producing and directing a documentary feature. I got divorced when I was 50. And so for the first time in 25 years, I was solely responsible for my financial well-being. And some of that responsibility hit me kind of hard. I was like, wow, can't believe I just wasn't so involved in that. I was involved in raising the kids. I was involved in doing all the volunteer work. I had my side job as a photographer. And, hindsight's 2020, but I kind of wish I had been a little bit more active in understanding and managing personal finance.
Yeah. So how did you kind of get started for all of these documentaries, really? But for Savvy right now, how do you get started as the director on the project? Are you recruiting people to come onto the project? Are you approaching people for interviews? Like, do you kind of already have an idea how that goes? This being like not your first rodeo in this documentary world.
Yeah. So the first thing I do is reach out to my team that's worked with me before to see if they're available and if they're interested in the subject. So I'll reach out to producers and editors, see who's in, see who wants to jump in on this with me. But then one of the most important things that I do after that is to start doing research. And so I need to find out whether or not this is really viable. Like, is there an easy solution to this issue? Because if there's a really easy solution, then it's not going to make a good film.
Yeah.
But if it's complex and if there are a lot of different issues, then it could make an interesting film. So I start reading. I put a Google alert on for in this case it was for women, money.
Oh wow.
Women, finance, that type of thing. And started getting articles every morning. I'd wake up to 5, 6, 7 articles from all over the world about women and money.
Wow.
And I began to look for looking for patterns. Like, what are some of these? What are the major issues? What are women really talking about or not talking about? Whether it's student debt or credit card debt or financial abuse, a whole host of issues that seemed pretty common and not just in the United States.
Okay, yeah. So this is a broader issue than just our country as far as that goes.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting because there might be some subtle differences, but in a lot of countries, even if women are predominantly responsible for handling the day-to-day, household budget. So women might be responsible for going out and getting the groceries or doing the shopping or paying for, a couple things that the kids need. That doesn't mean that they understand investing, and it doesn't mean that they understand, long-term savings and how much debt they're carrying. So these are issues that I think, the broader issues that are so important. And the reason that these things are so important are this. Number one, women live longer than men. Okay. Number two, women spend more time out of the workplace than men because we care for children and elderly parents.
Yeah.
Three, we only make 80 cents on the dollar if you're lucky enough, if you're lucky.
Hmm.
Black women make much less than that than compared to sort of the white man, right? So we have longer lives to finance with less money. And it's a problem. It's a problem if you're suddenly widowed. It's a problem if you're suddenly divorced. It's a problem if you just are in charge of your own money and you're susceptible to, fraud,
Yeah.
right? So being financially savvy and financially independent is probably the most empowering and important thing that a woman can do for herself. Anyone can do for themselves, actually. Anyone.
Was that something that you were kind of surprised, I guess would be the word, to learn once you started doing the research in this that, oh man, this isn't just me, this is a like widespread issue.
Yeah, I felt at first like this is crazy. I have my MBA. I've worked in the stock market, right? Like, in my 20s, I used to work selling IPOs.
Oh,
So is it just me that sort of turned a blind eye to this while I was married? The most shocking thing that I learned making this film was that this isn't just sort of the habits of our grandparents, of our parents, my mom. This is getting worse. Millennials are the generation right now that has the highest percentage of women who are abdicating major financial decisions to their spouses.
dang, wow. Is that something that you find throughout the course of the film as a way that we can address that?
Well, yeah, we dig into a little bit to why is this? I mean, why would it be that you I have such great hope for younger generations, right? That
Hmm.
they're getting closer to gender equality, they're narrowing the pay gap. So why is it that younger women tend to take a back seat when it comes to personal finance, especially once they get married? And even in same-sex relationships, 42% of women abdicate to their partner.
Mm,
So why do we do this? Is it societal norms? Is it because we're too busy and we're handling all of the everything else?
yeah.
If we're trying to work and take care of the kids and do the volunteer hours and just manage the household. I mean, that's a lot to do. So adding one more thing, like having to worry about how much money we're putting away into our 401k, it might just be that just too much. It might be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Or is it that that the finance world, it was made pretty much by men for men, not purposely to exclude women. It's just that that was the gender norm of the time, right? So all the jargon and the warlike analogies and the acronyms that go along with, say, Wall Street and investing are really a turnoff to women.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you bring up. I personally myself as a 25-year-old man just started reading about finances and I was like, I've know nothing about any of this and it was such an eye opener. And so this is such a interesting topic because I'm like, I don't know anything about this, and so to know that this is a widespread issue, specifically, I mean, for women abdicating, like you said, their finances and their situations, and it's such an interesting topic to dive into. When, like you said earlier, like you lived in that world, selling stocks and everything. Was that something that you felt when you were in there? Were you like, oh, I don't I'm not necessarily made for this world like this like you said was kind of made for men. Could you feel that back then?
Oh no, I totally felt it back then. I mean, I was your age, and then for a couple of years older. I remember, and I was living in Europe, so
Mm,
even more so, right? And the fact that my name is Robin, I think half the time that I signed up for conferences on investing or whatever, they
yeah.
thought I was a man. But I'll tell you that I felt proud of the fact that I knew about secondary market for investing or initial public offerings. Back in my late 20s as a woman, I knew I was sort of an anomaly. There weren't a lot of us. Um, what I realized though was, when I would go to a cocktail party or something and I would hang with the guys and talk about stocks and the EQ and the different derivatives on the market, they were uncomfortable a little bit with me talking about this stuff.
Wow.
It was really weird. And the sort of even judgment from other women, right? Because,
Mhm.
wow, well, what's that? I mean, it was just something that they couldn't relate to. And what's interesting is that there's this taboo around women around talking about money. Women in our society and in many societies, it is not okay for women to talk about money. I can't go up to another woman and say, how much do you make? How much does your husband make? What have you
Mhm.
invested in lately? Well, how much debt are you carrying on your, how many mortgages do you have on your house? Those are not questions that are acceptable to
Mhm.
ask,
Yeah.
even sometimes amongst your best friends.
Yeah, yeah, people get really uncomfortable as soon as you bring
Right.
up money.
Now, men have a little bit better time asking each other those questions.
Mhm.
And, who knows if the answer's a little exaggerated or not, but it seems to be okay. But amongst women, that's taboo. So then the question goes to, okay, well, how are we going to learn this then? They're not teaching it in schools. We're not taught what a credit score is in schools, or even how to get a great credit score, or how to manage a credit card or credit card debt.
Yeah, yeah.
If you can't talk to your girlfriends about it, how are we supposed to learn?
Yeah. In the filmmaking process, you're getting these Google alerts. You're like, okay, there's something here. Everybody's on board. Where do you kind of go from there? Are you the one on the other side of the camera asking these questions? Are you just coordinating and kind of overseeing? Are you like building the narrative, I guess, doing the research?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, I definitely I was the one that
Mm,
does all the interviewing. We also do pre-interviews because this time, especially since I funded this during COVID, which was a challenge in itself, I didn't want to do any filming that I didn't need to do.
yeah.
Right? If I filmed an interview, I wanted the majority of that interview to go into the film, and so I needed to know what people were going to say. So the first thing we did was we thought, okay, from all this reading and research we're doing, what are the primary concerns? What are the main topics that we really need to cover in the film? We need to cover student loans, right?
Mhm.
Because people are drowning in student loan
Yeah.
debt. That's huge. Number two, credit card debt. Credit cards. How do you? Everybody's got to have a credit in the United States to have a credit card to establish credit, and yet nobody teaches us whether if you polled 10 of your friends and said, so wait, do you have to pay off your credit card every month, or do you supposed to keep a balance so that my credit score is better? You're going to get a variety of answers,
Yeah, you're right, 100%.
right? Yeah, so that should be very simple. We should all be taught that. Don't use more than 30% of your credit allowance, pay it off every month. Like, these are things that everybody should know.
Mhm.
Your APR, if it's 27%, that's absurd. Work it down. Call them and tell them you need it to be lowered. So that was a big issue. Financial abuse, I wanted to cover, I think, especially because of COVID and there was so much domestic abuse, and financial abuse is something that goes very often alongside domestic abuse. So I felt like I wanted to cover that, and try to find a personal story, somebody that was willing to share their story about that,
Mm.
for all the people out in the world that suffer from financial abuse. And it might be somebody bringing in $10 million a year, and it might be somebody that makes less than $10,000 a year. But financial abuse is out there, and a lot of people might not even know what that means. But if I described it, they would know the feeling, right?
Mhm.
Not having transparency, not having access to your own money, not feeling like you can make decisions even about money that you might make yourself. So that was another important one. And then investing. I felt like it was really important to talk about investing and how important it is. Compounding interest, how to save for retirement, how to save for your future. So once we identified the important themes that we wanted to cover, then we started digging and researching for stories. So we wanted to find really important stories, really compelling stories from women of all different backgrounds, all different ages, to share with us, their money stories, so that the audience could really relate.
So how do you go about finding people? Are you like just putting out, for lack of a better term, like a casting call, or are you like putting out feelers or be like, hey, I think I know a person, or how are you getting these people?
Yeah, a little of both. We don't actually do like casting calls,
Yeah.
but we do, for instance, a lot of it's just word of mouth and talking. So
Mm,
I would read articles and do a big deep search and find, say, women financial abuse, or women widowed money type things like that,
yeah.
and stories will pop up. We found Chanel Reynolds, who tells a really emotional story about how everything was going great. She had a 5-year-old son. They just decided to send him to private school. They just bought a bigger house. They had a bigger mortgage. They knew it was going to be tight for a couple years, but hey, things were going well. They could handle it. Boom, her husband goes out on a bike ride, gets hit by a car, and
Mm,
everything changed.
wow.
And she had to sell the house. She didn't know who had the mortgage. She didn't know if they'd signed their wills. She didn't know anything. And this is a very well educated, smart woman, right? It's just because she just sort of thought, we're in our 30s, early 30s. We don't need to worry about this. We'll just handle things like that later.
Yeah.
That's an extreme case, but it's not that unusual. So we started finding stories like that, and then it's about just approaching them and telling them what we do and what kind of films I've made in the past. And we'd really like to tell her story, and would she be open to it?
Do you feel the pressure when you are starting these projects where you're like, this is a real issue and it affects like so many people, including yourself in this situation. So when you're starting this, do you feel like, you know, nervous starting this up? Like, oh man, I hope I can do this justice. This is a real issue.
Honestly, I get the most nervous about funding it.
Mm,
I I wouldn't get nervous about just covering an issue, because I think that before I even started raising money for it, I'd really have done my research to know whether it's a viable subject matter for a feature documentary. So that I don't worry about as much. I mean, I vet the idea with other filmmakers, with friends, with family, and even sometimes they were like, "Wow, film about women and money sounds really boring." That didn't bother me, because I was like, "Nope, there's no way this is going to be boring. I got a handle on that." But what makes me nervous is the funding. Right? It's
mm,
going to cost me $1.5 million to make this film. How in the world am I going to raise that? And so starting out, I mean, this particular film, Savvy, because of COVID, I was fundraising for a year and a half. I mean,
oh
I'm
man.
still fundraising for the film, right?
Yeah.
So that's more the part that keeps me up at night.
One of the big things when you were sent my way was that this film was, like you said, made during COVID and picked up during COVID. What kind of challenges did y'all face in the production process during, trying to make a documentary during COVID?
Oh boy. Well, first thing we had to do was shut down completely.
Mm.
So we had to shut down. We had to postpone future shoots. We had only shot maybe 2/3 of the film, so we still had a good third of the film. We had at least probably 5 scenes to film, and some of them were pretty complicated, like this women investors club.
Oh.
Um, so we had to shut all that down for a while.
Mm.
I thought, well, okay, I won't panic. At first, remember, none of us knew how long this was going to be.
Yeah.
So, last March 13th, 2020, I mean, I just thought, okay, well, for a couple of weeks, that's all right. We'll postpone. We'll just have to push things out a couple of weeks. But then I realized that it was not the best time to fundraise anymore.
Mhm.
I think there was just really, most of my funders were focusing solely on frontline things to help with COVID, so making of masks, or frontline workers are trying to get ventilators, and obviously I respected how important that was to do, and I didn't want to confuse the situation, and I certainly didn't want to be misunderstood or seem inappropriate by trying to fundraise for this film during that time, even
Mhm.
though I do believe that women managing money was going to be even more important in the wake of COVID, right? I
Yeah.
knew this film would have really good significance in the wake of COVID. For about 3 months, I had to stop fundraising.
Mm.
And then, once the California Film Commission allowed us to get back to filming, I had to really shift some things around. We were supposed to go back to New York City to film. that wasn't going to happen because I couldn't afford to quarantine my staff for 14 days back there. It's too expensive.
Oh yeah.
We had to shift around. Luckily, some of my subjects were really great to fly out to us, to fly out to Burbank or to fly out to California, where we made it look like it was their home, you know. And one of the funniest ones was, oh my gosh! So there's this group in the film called the Fitz women, and they're an investment club that have been together for 37 years. So most of
Oh
these
man.
women are in their late 70s, 80s, even some into their early
Oh
90s.
yeah.
And we couldn't, I knew that I couldn't get the investment club in New York anymore. So we bailed on that. We found this club outside of Sacramento. The California Film Commission told us that we'd have to film obviously outside because it was COVID.
Hmm.
But then the California fires came through and the air quality index was skyrocketed. So I
Ooh.
couldn't ask women of a certain age, you know, to be outside with the smoke.
Yeah.
And then the California Sacramento summer, it was 115 degrees. We had this heat wave. So it was a crazy challenge. I had everybody on hold for a long time. And, you know, thank goodness we had a 24-hour window where the smoke cleared, the temperature went down to 95. We got it, you know, worked it out so that we put a huge shim over so that they could be under some shade, and we got the shot done. 14 women.
Oh my gosh.
That was crazy.
As good as you can ask for. Good air quality, 95 degrees, big shim.
Yep.
So one of the other big things that I noticed in the little rundown of Savvy was that a lot of scenes were kind of filled in using B-roll or like stock footage B-roll, I should say. How did you guys go about kind of approaching that? Was there like a weird like vetting process, I guess, to be like, okay, like this shot works, this one obviously doesn't. How did y'all approach trying to build out scenes using that?
Yeah, and again, this is all because of COVID, right? So
Yeah.
normally I would shoot my own B-roll.
Hmm.
Normally I'd take my team out and we shoot B-roll after every interview that we do or every shoot. We go out onto the streets and just get great footage of everyday people doing everyday things, and we can fill in parts of the film with that, you know, beautiful and beautifully shot B-roll. But because of COVID, that wasn't an option. Number
Hmm.
one, there really weren't that many people on the streets,
Yeah.
especially in California. I know Texas was a little different, but California, that we didn't, you know, people were inside. And then, secondly, if they were outside, they were wearing masks.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to date the film. I wasn't trying to hide from it. And there's, you know, one scene where you'll see sort of a little reference to masks, but we really didn't want to date the film by having just B-roll footage of people wearing masks. And I felt also like that was going to take people's attention, you know, 5 years from now away from the film content, you know, in the film, the importance of the film in terms of what we're talking about, and people would be like, "Oh wow, they're wearing masks. Remember that in 2000?"
Yeah,
So
exactly.
we had to rely on stock footage for some of our B-roll, and this was, of course, something that wasn't in the budget. And thanks to Adobe Stock, Adobe's an amazing company that we've had a really good relationship with, and they came to our rescue, and we were able to dig deep into their library, which actually is just starting. So Adobe Stock hasn't been around for too long, but they're doing a really good job of capturing some not stock looking, you know, footage.
Yeah.
So we were able to incorporate quite a bit of that into the film.
That is perfect that you describe it that way because one of my questions that I have on here is like, how did you avoid that stock video look? So, you specifically calling out that Adobe Stock is filling out their library with not stock looking stock footage is a really cool thing for them to do. I've seen that on the Creative Cloud and everything. I haven't booted up yet, but this is a good inspiration for me too.
Yeah, and I mean, kudos to them, right? And sure, you know, every once in a while you're going to come across something that looks maybe a little bit staged, and you're going to find that on all of the stock
Mhm.
sites. But but there's also some really beautiful, you know, stock videos and footage that is very similar to what we would have hoped to have shot ourselves.
So was that something that was brought forward to you that like one of the staff had used Adobe Stock, or was that something that you were looking for a solution and Adobe kind of approached y'all?
So we were already partnering with Adobe on,
Mm.
as I have on my last film as well, using team projects, which again was incredibly helpful because my editor was in Hawaii. I was in
Oh wow.
California. I was in San Francisco. Sometimes I was in Park City. I had assistant editor was in Oakland, and then San Francisco, and so we basically edited this film. um, I've never met my editor face to face because she
What?
couldn't leave. She could not leave Hawaii, and I could not get to Hawaii.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So thanks to Adobe Team Projects, we were able to, upload this footage, and she and so Shirley Thompson, my editor, and assistant editor Annie Munger were able to work on the project pretty much side by side, even being, what is that, like, 2,000 miles away from each other.
Dang, were y'all just like in a big Zoom call together talking about like the timeline?
I did a lot of Zoom calls, yes. Even when it came to doing the score, doing animation, all of that was done over Zoom.
Oh man. So my last like savvy centered question is kind of a obtuse one. But was there a challenge or anything that you kind of learned from Savvy that made it stand out versus the other docs that you've done? Was there any big wrenches that got thrown in there that you just weren't expecting?
Well, I'd say because of COVID again, the lesson that I learned making this film was do not delay filming. If COVID had hit and I was ready to start editing, I really would have. I mean, I think I'd be a lot less gray than I am now. A lot, the bags under my eyes wouldn't be there. I mean, I seriously lost a lot of sleep worrying about how we were going to shoot the footage and all of that. You know, look, hindsight's 2020. You never really know, and nobody knew that pandemic was
Mhm.
right around the corner. But I've now learned that if someone says to you, "Sure, I'll interview with you. I can do it next week, or I can do it in August," I'm going to say I will be there next week
Yeah.
because I now have this sort of, it might even be a little bit irrational. And this is probably part of like PTSD or something. But I now feel like, oh my God, you've got this interview with somebody really awesome. Grab it. Like, get that interview in the can.
So we talked before. This is going to the Boulder Festival in June. You said.
Yeah. So our next festival is the Boulder International Film Festival, which is a festival that I've been to now. This will be I think, my third film there. Just a great festival. They're going to have a virtual component as well. So it starts June 24th, and there will be in-person screenings until the 27th. So over that weekend,
Hmm.
and then they're going to have virtual component until I think it's July 6th.
Ooh, and Savvy will be on the in the virtual thing, so people can like tune in.
As far as I know, yes.
Perfect. Cool. I will throw a link in the description for that. So if anybody catches this episode at a good time, they can tune in and watch it themselves.
Great, thank you.
So that is the now, that is the here. But I always like to with guests, especially somebody with your experience. I want to go all the way back to the beginning of your film career and kind of just dive into what got you into filmmaking. What were your early inspirations? What brought you to the game?
Yeah, so I've been interested in photography for many years. I think I took a mini class or something when I was as young as 10 years old,
Mm.
and I was just hooked from there on. So I've always loved photography, and I'll never forget. I want to say this was in the mid 90s or something, but I watched a film called Born into Brothels. It went to Sundance, I think. It was a really interesting film um, about these kids that were born in brothels in Calcutta, India.
Mm.
And what was really striking about it to me was that the filmmaker set out to do a film about sex workers in Calcutta. And it wasn't until she was over there inside, sort of, in this environment, that what she changed to completely pivoted, because what fascinated her more were these kids and how these kids were born from these women. And so she gave the kids these little disposable cameras and they ran around and took these amazing pictures. Anyway, the film is beautiful. It's visually beautiful. And I sat in the theater, and when the film stopped, I had this huge ache in my heart. And I thought, oh, I'm missing out. Like, I have got to create like that. I
Yeah.
really did. I thought, I am missing out. I've missed my calling. I've got to do that someday. And I think, like a lot of us, when is that someday, right? We can put
Mhm.
that someday off because it's kind of scary to say, I'm going to do it. Like, if I say I'm going to run a marathon, I'll be damned if I don't finish that marathon, right? So saying I'm going to make a film was not an easy thing for me. But in 2009, my daughter was in high school and she was involved in an incident with her cross country team and her coach, who had just recently been diagnosed with ALS.
Hmm.
It was a story that got some international attention, and a filmmaker came to me and said, "We want to make a film about not just your daughter, but about the racing team, this cross country team, and their coach." And I ended up getting involved, partly because I wanted to protect how my daughter was portrayed,
Yeah.
but also because of this interest I had in documentary filmmaking. And I ended up, for a variety of reasons, taking that project over and
Oh,
finishing
wow.
it with the help of another director. And so that was like going to film school.
Dang.
And it was when I finished that film, which is, you can find it on Amazon Prime. It's called Running for Jim. And again, keep in mind, it was my first project ever. We used, like, I don't know, 16 different cameras on the shoot. There's like no, thank God the story carries the film, because technically I didn't know what I was doing, but I got the bug. And I thought, okay,
Yeah.
now I know how to make a film. And also, kudos and thanks to the San Francisco documentary community, who really helped me out. The late Jamie Redford was there every time he picked up the phone if I called and asked for advice, or needed some sort of counsel on something. And many other very, very experienced documentarians and producers in San Francisco that helped me along the way. So I'd be nowhere if it weren't for them. And then I had the bug. I wanted to make another film, and that's when I jumped into code debugging the gender gap. A good friend of mine from college, Stacy Hartman, and I decided that that would be a really interesting topic. Why aren't there more women and people of color in tech when there's so many unfilled jobs out there? So that film we made, and that went to Tribeca, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, and that's kind of how I got started.
Was Code, and Tribeca your first, like, festival that you were in?
No, so Running for Jim did go to several festivals,
Got you,
but
okay.
they it didn't go to anything as big as Tribeca. But
Mhm.
Code getting into Tribeca was probably my biggest, like, whoa, this is awesome. But I will also tell you that, you know only a handful of films get into the Sundances and Tribecas and some of these, hot docs.
Mhm.
There are thousands of really excellent films that just don't get into some film festivals because they don't have room for all of them, right?
Yeah.
So Jamie Redford said to me once, "Don't ever judge the success of your film by what festivals you get into." And I'd like to reiterate that because he's so true. It's so true. The important thing is that you find your audience wherever it is. And some of my favorite film festivals are super small town festivals, like, the Naples International Film Festivals, Naples, Florida. It's one of my favorite film festivals out there. I mean, who knew? But they fill their theaters every time. They're really a great audience, and it's really well organized. So, yeah, there are a zillion film festivals, and I say just throw your film out to as many as you can afford to submit to, and see where you land.
That's a really good jumping off point, because I wanted to ask, like, making Running for Jim and just diving into this, what kinda lessons, what kind of advice would you have for people, kinda jumping into this world like you did, and you kind of learned by jumping into the deep end. So what kind of lessons did you learn? I mean, going from running for Jim to code debugging the gender gap, which I feel like really set the tone for what your filmography would be, which is like these really in-depth, really cool documentaries.
Yeah, I think the most important thing I've learned, and I've used this sort of knowledge, in all 5 films that I've made now, is how important it is to choose your team very carefully, and finding people who have integrity, who you trust, obviously who are skilled and good at what they do, but that can
Mhm.
share passion with you for the project. Um, Building a team that works well together but is not, each individual also feels safe to be able to disagree with somebody and to be open and collaborative, and really be able to debate and discuss issues. That's the important thing. You don't want to surround yourself with too many like-minded people, because then you really don't know if you're going to create something that reaches a broad audience.
Yeah.
So I would say that that's incredibly important. And people, I always obviously wanted to build a team of people who respect a female director. That's of course
Mhm.
important to me too. But I feel very lucky to have worked with amazing teams.
So this is a really cheesy question, but it just popped into my head. Do you think that little Robin watching today's Robin's movies would be like, I still gotta, I gotta do it. Do you think you would give yourself the same inspiration that the children of Bromfels did?
Mm, well, I I'm hard on myself.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, there's a point in all the films I've made, which is funny. Sometimes it's something totally different, but and especially if I haven't seen it for a while, and then I'll watch the film again, where I kind of get goosebumps, and I think, oh my
Mm,
god, that was my vision, this vision that I had, and then by the skills of the editor and the incredible talent of the composer and the colorist and the cinematographer, look what we created together.
yeah.
And it gives me chills, because I look up at the scene and I think, oh my god, that's what I envisioned, and we got it there. So that does happen to me still. And then every once in a while I'm like, is that a censored dust on the screen there? Why didn't we catch that?
I know what you mean. Like, no matter how good the project is in the moment, you're gonna watch it back later and be like, I could have done better.
Yeah, but I mean, hopefully not. Hopefully you know, we just can appreciate what we're putting out there in the world. And
Mhm. So I'd be remiss, this being an editing podcast, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, for you approaching this documentary, something I've always wondered with docs is, do y'all go into shooting like wanting to shoot a whole bunch extra in mind? Because I imagine that there's like a whole bunch that you guys don't include in the edit that you shot just in case.
yeah, it kind of depends. So if it's an interview, then I really only have a short amount of time.
Hmm.
I've got maximum maybe 75 minutes to keep that person in the chair, and to get as much, to get the ask the questions that are going to bring out the real soul of the person I'm interviewing. So when it comes to that, I don't think there's any value in interviewing somebody for, unless that person's like the only person that's going to be in the film,
Hmm.
for interviewing somebody for 2.5 hours. They get exhausted, you're exhausted, they start repeating themselves. They're not going to say anything better.
Hmm.
So I try just to really get the core and the essence of what they believe in and what they have to offer in that 60-minute interview. Um, but when it comes to scenes and B-roll, honestly, what I've learned from editors I've worked with is you can never have too much. Yeah, it's expensive to shoot 4K and to process it all, but just capture what you can, because you need enormous amounts of B-roll, especially if you're covering up a talking head,
Yeah.
and especially if you're talking about really sort of something as out there as unconscious bias, right? Or it's like, great, you made a film about unconscious bias, like what are you going to show on the screen? And so you need an enormous amount of B-roll. So there, I don't really think you can overshoot that.
So being in photography as much as you are and being the director and everything, after all this time, do you have a favorite go-to camera for your shoots or for just your personal life, really?
Yeah, so I stopped. I didn't do any filming for this film. I did a little bit with Bias, but really the last film that I did, film, where I literally held the camera myself, was for Code Debugging the Gender Gap. But as a one of my absolute favorite line producers, Brooke Holston said, she said, "You're a director, you're a producer. You got to let other people do their jobs." Took the camera out of my hands, and believe me, I'm well aware there are other people much more talented at videography than I. Still photography is more what I was involved in, but every once in a while I do have a vision, and I would just love for to shoot it. So I'll sort of be breathing over the shoulder of my DP,
Mhm.
asking him to get this shot or that shot. Um, we love the Sony F5. I would say that if it were up to me and I was just going to grab one camera for me to go out and shoot with, it's the Sony A7S. And that's because, or whatever the newest one of that model is,
Mhm.
because it's great in low light, it's super compact and small, it shoots in 4K, and it just makes life easy if you just had one grab camera and go out and see what you can get. It holds up pretty well.
That's amazing that that's what you call out, because I believe what we have at our studio is a Sony FS5 for all of our internal videos. So that is good to know that it is director approved.
Yeah.
So as we wind down, I'm going to ask the same thing that I always ask, which is if you had to pick a favorite moment from the career, a highlight, it could be a couple, but it cannot include Savvy because that is a cop out and I will not have it. What would be your favorite standout moment of your career so far?
Boy. Well, that is a good question. I've done two TED Talks. One's a TEDx and one's a TED Talk.
Oh, wow.
And those both came from making films. And I would say that the TED Talk was terrifying. And, I froze on stage. I mean, that was tough. The TEDx talk, I redeemed myself and did pretty smoothly. But I would say probably, becoming more comfortable with public speaking is pretty standout for me. I think it's a valuable tool to have and skill. And so the fact that has come from filmmaking is really interesting to me. But I think it also hopefully will have its uses, beyond my filmmaking years.
Yeah. Do you find that that helps a lot with your like interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that once you're just comfortable talking, even whether it's one person, many of us are comfortable talking with one person, but
Mhm.
standing in front of a couple thousand people in a room makes it a little bit more intimidating. But just knowing that you can do that, um, I think is great. I mean, it's interesting you say standout moments. A couple of the things I think about is like the first time that I stood up and on stage after the screening of a film at a film festival where it's sold out, and standing there with my team and looking around, thinking how amazing that we made this film, and look at these people appreciating it. That's a really good feeling too.
Well, I could not think of a better way to cap this interview off. Thank you so much for being here, Robin. It was very educational for me. I can't imagine what people listening to it could also get from it. So thank you so much for coming on.
Corey, thank you so much for having me. I think it's awesome, and good luck to you.
Yeah, yeah. Good luck to you as well with Savvy going to the Boulder International Film Festival in June. Did I get that right?
You got it right.
So be sure, like I said earlier, check the description. If you're here before June, check out Savvy. It sounds like a really cool doc, and I'm excited to check it out myself. Remember, everybody, feel free to like, subscribe. We're everywhere where you can get a podcast. So check us out. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you in the edit bay.